Okay, this is grade 9, Math Links, chapter 8.1 on solving one-step algebraic equations. What differs this chapter from a grade 7 one-step chapter or a grade 8 one-step chapter is that your coefficients and your constants are either fractions or decimals. So you can have decimal coefficients and decimal constants and fractional coefficients and fraction constants. So that's the only difference between this and grade 7 and 8 work. Same process, just different values. So the first question gives us 2x equals 5/8. Now back in grade 7, you realize that in order to isolate the variable, you're going to divide this side by 2 to get rid of the coefficient, because 2x is divided into two groups, it's just 1x. But when we divide this side by 2, we're actually going to write it like this. And further to that, we're actually going to write 2 as being 2 over 1, because when we divide by fractions, especially whole numbers, we want to change the multiplication by the reciprocal. So this is going to become 5/8 multiplied by the reciprocal of 2, or the flip of 2, which is 1/2. And that's going to be 5/16. And therefore, x is equal to 5/16. Question 2, we have half of x is equal to 2/5. So again, back in grade 7, you learned if you double this side or multiply half of x by 2, you will get x. And if you multiply the other side by 2, since it's a fraction, we're going to multiply it by 2. But since that's a whole number, we're going to treat the whole number as being a fraction over 1. We're going to multiply the numerators to get 4. We're going to multiply the denominators to get 5. And our final answer for the second question is x is equal to 4/5. In our third question, the only difference is we've switched sides of the variable, but your coefficient here is still a fraction. So over here, to get rid of that coefficient of negative 1 1/4, I'm going to divide by negative 1 1/4 to get rid of it. And over here, I'm going to take 4/3 divided by negative 1 1/4, and that's going to be my solution for x. So I'm going to keep the first fraction. I'm going to change that mixed fraction or that mixed fraction to improper, which will be negative 5/4. So negative 1 1/4 is, as an improper fraction, negative 5/4. Keep the first fraction, change to multiplication, and use the reciprocal of the second fraction. Now notice, I kept my negative symbol, not with the 5, but rather with the numerator. And it doesn't really matter what you do, I just always do it this way. And when you multiply the numerators, you get negative 16. When you multiply the denominators, you get a positive 15, which is the final answer, is negative 1 and 1/15. Your next question is a fractional coefficient, a negative mixed fraction coefficient. To get rid of it, I'm going to divide by negative 1 1/2 to get rid of that multiplication coefficient, leave me with x. So when I divide the other side by negative 1 1/2, I'm going to change both of these fractions, both this and this, to improper. The easiest way to solve a division is to keep the first fraction, change the multiplication, and use the reciprocal. The reciprocal of negative 3/2 is negative 2/3. If you can cross-reduce, you should do so. You don't have to. If you don't cross-reduce, you get 18/12. If you do cross-reduce, this will become negative 3/1 and negative 1/2, which will leave you with positive 3/2 or 1 1/2. And over here, this will be 1 6/12, which will reduce down to still 1 1/2. So x will equal 1 1/2. Your next question says 3/5 is equal to how many quarters? Is what it really says. But if I multiply this by 4, I get rid of that, leaving me with x. And if I multiply this side by 4, or better yet, 4/1, I'll get 12/5, which is the answer. Or in lowest terms, x will equal 2 2/5. Your next question says 2x equals negative 6/5. So I'm going to divide by 2 here to get rid of it. And when I divide by 2, I'm really going to multiply by 1/2, which is going to give me negative 6 over 10, or negative 3 over 5 in lowest term. So x is equal to negative 6/10 or negative 3/5. Coefficient here is negative 4/3, so I'm going to divide by negative 4/3 to get rid of it. And over here, negative 7/6 divided by negative 4/3 will result in negative 7/6 multiplied by the reciprocal. If you can cross-reduce, you should do so. And when you do so, you get negative 7 over negative 8, which is the same thing as just 7/8. So x would equal positive 7/8. Your next question says 2 2/3 x equals 1 1/6. Your coefficient is 2 2/3. So I'm going to divide this side by 2 2/3 to get rid of the coefficient. And I'm going to divide this side by 2 2/3 to figure out its value. Since we're dealing with mixed fractions, we're going to change both of them to improper. And then to do division, I'm going to keep the first fraction, change the multiplication by the reciprocal. Check for cross reduction. 3 over 6 will reduce down to 1 over 2. And therefore, when you multiply your numerators, you'll get 7. And when you multiply your denominators, you'll get 16. So x will equal 7/16. Now we get into the easier part of it when you have decimal coefficients. So here we have a decimal coefficient of negative 5.6x. So I'm going to divide by negative 5.6 to get rid of it. And now, since we don't need to do this without a calculator, the easy part is going to be taking a calculator and saying what is 3.5 divided by 5.6, and the answer is 0.625. And a positive divided by negative is a negative, so your answer is negative 0.625. Here we have a number divided by negative 2.2 equals negative 0.7. So we're going to get rid of that division by multiplying both sides by negative 2.2. Opposite operation leaves me with x. Take my calculator and 0.75. Now if you want to use the negative sign, you can. I just don't know where mine is on my calculator. Oh, here it is. Negative. Multiplied by 2.2 negative. It'll tell you it's positive. And the answer is positive 1.65. Ooh, wrong way. Multiply both sides by 4.1. X will equal, let's do it on paper this time. 6, 3, 24, 14, 6, 7, 4, 1, 14.76. Here we have our coefficient and our variable on the right-hand side instead of the left, but we're still going to divide both sides by the coefficient to get rid of it, leaving me with x, or isolating the variable. Once we do that, we take our calculator, and 1.477, 1.472 divided by 0.46 is 3.2, and therefore x equals 3.2. And I think our last question of our regular algebra. Now this is second last, sorry, on the one sheet. The first thing it says is negative 5.5 equals 1.1 divided by x. Now this is actually a two-step equation, and what we're going to do is we're going to multiply both sides by x. And when I multiply both sides by x, over here I'm going to get negative 5.5 multiplied by x, or simply a coefficient to x, equals 1.1. So when I multiply both sides by x, I get this new equation. And then I'm going to divide both sides by the coefficient to isolate x as negative, or 1.1 divided by 5.5, 1.1 divided by 5.5, oops, equals 0.2. And that's your solution. Same as the last one, 4.8 divided by x. I'm going to multiply both sides by x because it's actually a two-step equation. I'm left with 4.8 on this side equals 6.4 times x, or 6.4 as a coefficient of x. Divide both sides by 6.4, and x will equal the quotient of 4.8 and 6.4, which is 0.75. Your next question says the average speed of a vehicle, S, is represented by the formula S equals D over T, where S equals speed, D equals distance, and T equals time. If Toby drove an average speed of 85 kilometers an hour for 3.75 hours, how far did he travel? Well, Toby shouldn't be driving because I believe he's only 14 years old, but we'll ignore that for the time being. So what we're going to do is we're going to first write our formula, and we're going to substitute all we know into the formula to see what happens. So speed is 85, so we're going to put 85 where the S is. 3.75 hours is the time, so it's going to go down here. And your D is going to remain as distance, and we're going to end up with this. We want to isolate the variable for D, so we're going to multiply both sides by 3.75. And that is going to give me D equals the product of these two, which will be 3.75 multiplied by 85. It's 318.75. Therefore, how far did he travel? Therefore, Toblerone traveled 318.75 and 3/4 kilometers. The second part says if Faith drove 152 kilometers at an average speed of 95 kilometers an hour, how much time did her trip take? So this time we're going to substitute speed is 95, distance is 152, and time is what we don't know. So here we actually have a two-step equation. First thing I'm going to do is multiply both sides by t, leaving me with 152 on this side. And over here, 95 times t is just going to be a variable coefficient term. Divide both sides by the coefficient of 95, and t will equal 152 divided by 95 equals 1.6. So therefore, Faith took 1.6 hours to travel 152 kilometers. Now, 1.6 hours, since 0.1 hours is equal to 6 minutes, then 1.6 hours would be 1 hour and 36 minutes, if you wanted to think of it in a little bit more complex term. Now, the next question says a roll of nickels is worth $2. Write and solve an equation to determine the number of nickels in a roll. So, the first thing we want to do in these story problems is define the variable. So x is going to equal the number of nickels. Now, most of you didn't write this down, so now I would like you to do so. The first step, step 1, is define your variable. Every single time, you need to define your variable. So I'm going to tell myself that x is going to represent what I'm looking for, or the number of nickels. Okay, because that's what I'm looking for. Determine the number of nickels. So usually your variable is what you're looking for. X equals the number of nickels. So if I have 2 nickels, I would have 10 cents. And what we would do with that is if I take the number of nickels and I multiply it by 5 cents. So I'm going to write down 5 cents here. Multiplied by the number of nickels is going to equal $2. There's a problem with this equation. And the reason why is they are not the same units. This side here is in dollars. Take my highlighter. Dollars. And this side here is in cents. So what we're going to do is I am going to keep $2, $2. Oops. Oopsie daisy. But over here, my coefficient is not going to be 5. It's going to be 5 cents, which means the equation is 0.05, or a nickel, multiplied by the number of nickels has to equal $2. So whatever that x equals, the number of nickels, it has to equal a roll of nickels, which is $2. So if I divide both sides by 0.05, I'm going to isolate it for the number of nickels. If I take $2 and divide it by a nickel, oh, that's not right, a nickel, the answer is 40. And therefore, there are 40 nickels in a roll. Our next question says, write and solve an equation to determine the side length S of a square with a perimeter of 25.8. So perimeter equals 25.8 centimeters, and S is this. So we know that the formula for perimeter of a square is 4 multiplied by the side length. Okay? So if I was to write this out, the perimeter being 25.8 centimeters is equal to 4 multiplied by the side length. If I divide both sides by my coefficient of 4, my side length will equal 25.8 divided by 4, which means my side length is 6.45 centimeters. And that would make sense. 6.45, 6.45, 6.45, and 6.45, since it's a square, would give me a perimeter of 25.8. One year, a student council sold 856 copies of a school yearbook. 4/5 of the students at the school bought a copy. So how many students did not buy a yearbook? So the first thing is X equals number of students. It's a little bit different than the last one, in the school. X is going to equal the number of students in a school. So 4/5 of all the students is going to be 4/5 multiplied by X, or the number of students. So 4/5 times X is the number of students who bought a yearbook, and that is going to equal 856 students. Okay? So I'm going to divide this side by 4/5 to get rid of the coefficient, and I'm going to divide this side by 4/5. Now, at this stage of the game, you can either keep it as fractions or realize that it's much easier to change 4/5 to its decimal form, which is decimal 8. So instead of doing the regular way, I'm going to say, okay, I'll just change 4/5 to decimal 8. And then that way, I don't have to use fractions at all. I can just use a calculator. 856 divided by 0.8 is equal to 1,070. So therefore, there are 1,070 students in the school, because that's what I define my variable as. But I'm not done yet, because the question is not how many students are in the school. The question is how many students did not buy a yearbook. And since 4/5 did, the assumption we're going to make is that 1/5 did not. So our last question will be, what is the fifth of the school that didn't buy a yearbook? A fifth of 1,070. A fifth is really 20% of this multiplication, 1,070. So what is 20% of the school who didn't buy a yearbook? 20% of the 1,070 kids means that therefore, there are 214 kids, 214 students didn't buy a yearbook. That's a yearbook. Sierra spends 40% of her net income on rent and 15% of her net income on food. If she spends a total of $1,375 per month on rent and food, what is her net monthly income? Sierra's rich. First thing we have to determine is Sierra's rich, and she should not be in grade 9 anymore. But if she spends 40, so the first thing we're going to do is X is going to equal her monthly income. To find the variable is step 1. Step 2 is to create an equation. So if 40% of her income is spent on rent and 15% is spent on food, then that means that 55% is spent on food and rent, which means 55% of her monthly income is equal to $1,375. Now 55% is a decimal, is 0.55. Of is multiplication, and X is a variable, so 0.55 means 55%. Coefficients are multiplication, so the word of is really this coefficient idea, equals 1375. Dividez-vous both sides by 0.55. And if I use a calculator, let's say what is 1375 divided by 0.55, we learned that Sierra makes $2,500 a month. Wilmac Travel has a sale on Caribbean cruises at 20% off. Their advertisement reads, you save $249.99. What is the sale price of the cruise? Okay, so X is going to equal the regular price. Okay, so 20% of the regular price is a savings of $249.99. So 20% of the regular price is $249, or 20% of the regular price, algebraically will look like that, is equal to $249.99. And therefore, I'm going to divide both sides by 0.2. And therefore, $249.99 divided by 0.2 tells me that the regular price of the trip was $1,249.95. But we're not done, because that's not the question. The question is, if that's the regular price, and you're going to save this much, then you have to take the regular price of the trip, subtract what you're saving, and you will get the final cost of the trip. So I'm going to borrow here, get a 6. I'm going to borrow here, get an 8, get a 9. I'm going to borrow here, get a 3, get a 9. I'm going to borrow here, get a 9. I'm going to borrow here and get a 9. So therefore, the final cost of the trip was the sale price of the trip. Tricky question. The sale price is $999.96. The regular price is this. You save this much. Therefore, the answer we're looking for is $999.96. And your last question says a jar contains equal amounts of nickels and dimes. The total value of coins is 405. How many coins are in the jar? So X is going to equal the number of dimes or nickels. Dimes or whatever, it doesn't matter. So the value of the nickel is 0.05. And if I multiply that by the number of dimes, or number of nickels, because it's the same amount, plus 0.10x, since x is going to be the same number in both cases, we're going to have 0.05x plus 0.10x is going to equal $4.05. And now we go back to chapter 5 on adding and subtracting polynomials or gathering like terms. I can add these two together because they are like terms, which means I combine the coefficients. So that's going to become 0.15x equals 4.05. I'll take this down here. Divide both sides by the coefficient. And x is going to equal, bring it over here, $4.05 divided by the coefficient of 0.15 tells me that x equals 27. Therefore, there are both 27 dimes and 27 nickels. 27 dimes and 27 nickels will equal $4.05. Now, your last question is more complicated, but not too much more complicated. It says a jar contains a mixture of dimes and nickels worth a total of $4.75. There are 3 times as many nickels as dimes. So x is going to equal the number of dimes again. Okay? X is going to equal the number of dimes. And if we think about this, then the number of dimes plus, now remember, if there are that many dimes, there are this many is the number of nickels. Because there's 3 times as many. So if there's X number of dimes, and there's 3 times as many nickels, then there's going to be 3 times that, which means it's going to be a nickel multiplied by 3x. And together, that is going to equal $4.75. So here, I'm going to simply keep this as 0.10x plus, when I multiply this out, I'm going to get 0.15x will equal 4.75. Combine like terms. I get this. Divide both sides by your coefficient. Take your calculator. $4.75 divided by 0.25 is 19. So if I go back to this, x will equal 19. Since x equals the number of dimes, therefore, there are 19 dimes. And if there's 3 times as many nickels, and there are 54 nickels. And if you do the math on that, it should work out to be 4.75.